Okay, so the term social justice warrior, right? SJW, we've all heard it, gets thrown around a lot, often pretty heatedly. But have you ever really stopped to think, like, where do these ideas actually come from? What's really behind it all? Well, today we're doing a deep dive. We've got a source that lays out this really surprising intellectual history. It kind of traces it back.
Yeah, exactly. And, our mission here is really just to explore what this specific source material is saying. It makes some claims about the origins, how these ideas evolved, that kind of thing. We're here to understand what the source says. We're not endorsing it, not critiquing it. Just want to give you a clear sense of its narrative, the information it's presenting.
Right, so buckle up. First, we'll look at some specific examples the source uses to define what it means by social justice or SJW content. Then, yeah, we're taking that trip back in time, looking at the philosophical roots. And finally, how this source argues these ideas sort of snowballed into, well, the online world we see today. All right, let's dig into this. Our source doesn't really ease into it, jumps straight in with examples it labels social justice warrior content.
hmm First one up is from someone called Santa Sparkles. It's about looping GIFs and videos. The perspective presented here is that these visuals, like a short looping music clip or a long animated GIF, can be, and I quote, very dangerous for people with compulsions or obsessions.
Ah,
The claim is they might get sort of stuck watching them, unable to look away and then feel anxious or distressed. So the suggested fix is tagging them, loop, long if, moving pattern. It's framed as kind of public service announcement.
huh. That's, yeah, very specific. Then it shifts gears quite a bit. The source brings up womanist musings and links. This example focuses on white woman privilege. It states pretty directly that the sale and rape of women of color historically kept roofs over white women's heads and dresses on their backs. And it argues white women demand their delicate feelings get priority when women of color talk about their experiences. It contrasts white women fighting for the vote with women of color, who it says were still fighting just to be seen as human, mentions the hashtag white woman privilege.
Quite a contrast to the GIF example. And there's a third one from Pervy Wrestling Caps. This one claims that prisoner read jokes are always funny, beautiful, hilarious, and sexy. The reasoning given is, well, it's provocative. It frames prison as maybe the only place where a heterosexual white male feels uncomfortable, powerless, and maybe even threatened. And that, the author concludes, is social justice. So three very different examples the source uses to set the stage.
And here's where it gets particularly striking, I think. The source then moves from online stuff to arguing these ideas have, quote, infected the real world. And it uses an audio clip.
Right. This audio clip, according to the source, it captures a really intense argument. The core conflict seems to be about defining woman. It contrasts biological female identity with identifying as a woman. You hear one person saying something like, I have a vagina. I call myself a woman. I identify as a woman. And another voice comes back strong saying, my friend who has penis who identifies as a woman is more female than I will ever be because guess what? She is a woman. The source presents this interaction as like a real-world example of social justice in action. Again, important to stress, this is how the source is presenting these examples to build its case.
So, okay, we've got these examples, but what's the connection? How did we get here? To understand that, our source takes us way back, all the way to 1914, to Karl Marx.
Yeah, Marx. He predicted, as many know, that a big war like World War I would spark a global workers' revolution, capitalism overthrown, communist utopia established. But, well, according to our source, that just didn't happen. No global revolution. Russia had one, sure. But the source calls it a stunning failure in terms of achieving that wider communist vision.
So Marx's big prediction fails. What then? The source describes Marxists around Europe kind of scratching their heads, right? Like, why didn't it work? What went wrong?
Exactly. And this is where two key thinkers come into the picture, according to the source. Antonio Gramsci in Italy and György Lukács in Hungary. Our source says they both reached basically the same conclusion. They decided that Western culture and also the Christian religion had effectively blinded the working class, blinded them to their true Marxist class interests. So communism was basically impossible in the West until you could destroy both Western culture and Christianity.
Wow, so the focus shifts. It's not just economics anymore.
Precisely. That's the key insight the source is highlighting here. It became about culture, about belief systems. They saw those as the main barriers, which suggests a different path to revolution. A slower one, maybe? More
Yeah.
cultural?
And Lukács, the source points out, he didn't just theorize. He acted on it.
Yeah, pretty quickly. In 1919, he was Deputy Commissar for Culture in the short-lived Hungarian Soviet Republic, and he introduced sex education into schools. The source claims his reasoning was this would attack traditional Western sexual morals, and destroying those morals was seen as a, quote, giant step towards destroying Western culture itself.
And Gramsci. He was writing from prison, wasn't
Well,
he?
from 1926, imprisoned by Mussolini, he wrote his famous prison notebooks. And in them, he laid out this strategy for, again, destroying Western faith and culture. But his idea was more about an intentional collapse from within. What makes Gramsci stand out, according to this source, is that he pushed for both economic warfare, the classic Marxist idea, and social and cultural warfare. They had to work together.
So if the original Marxist economic plan wasn't enough, Gramsci brings in this idea of cultural and social attack. How does he frame that? Our source mentions hegemony.
Right, hegemony, that's Gramsci's big concept here. Think of it as the dominant culture, the widely accepted system of values, morals, ethics, social structures. The things that hold a society together make it feel cohesive. The source lists examples from a Western context. Things like authority, morality, sexual restraint, monogamy, personal responsibility, patriotism, national unity, tradition, even language, Christianity, law, truth.
So basically, the underlying assumptions of society.
Exactly. And Gramsci's strategy, counter-hegemony, was designed to dismantle that, to attack it from the inside. And the source suggests the main tools for this were media and communications, slowly pushing counter-hegemony propaganda to change people's thinking over time.
This is fascinating how these ideas then sort of formally came together in what we now call the Frankfurt School.
Hmm. The Institute for Social Research. It was founded in 1923, Frankfurt University in Germany, later known as the Frankfurt School. And yeah, our source says it drew directly from Lukács and Gramsci, but also others like Max Weber, the sociologist, and Sigmund Freud. Key names associated with it are Max Horkheimer, Theodor Adorno, Wilhelm Reich, Erich Fromm, and Herbert Marcuse. He becomes important later.
And what's really interesting, you pointed this out, is they actually disagreed with Marx on some key things.
They did. A major point was culture. They argued culture wasn't just superstructure, determined by the economic base like Marx said. They saw it as an independent and very important variable. And crucially, they argued the working class wouldn't lead the revolution anymore. Why? Because they were becoming part of the middle class, integrated into the system.
Okay, so if the working class isn't going to lead the charge, the big question the source raises is, who would?
Right. And that's where Marcuse comes back in. In the 1950s, he proposed a new revolutionary force. He suggested it would be a coalition of blacks, students, feminist women, and homosexuals. These marginalized groups, he thought, would be the new agents of change. A huge shift from traditional Marxism, as the source presents it.
And they developed a specific method or philosophy for this, didn't they? Critical theory.
Yes, critical theory. Max Horkheimer laid it out in an essay in 1937. The source really emphasizes its purpose. It wasn't like traditional theory, which just tries to understand or explain society. Critical theory's explicit goal was changing society as a whole. Specifically, Horkheimer said, changing it in the manner that Gramsci and Lukács envisioned. Basically, creating the conditions needed for that Marxist revolution they still aimed for, but via cultural means. So theory as a tool for radical change.
Okay, connecting the dots here. The story really takes off, according to our source, when the Frankfurt School actually moved to America.
That's a key part of the narrative. When the Nazis came to power in 1933, the institute closed in Germany. With help from Columbia University, it actually reopened in New York City. And over the next decade or so, their focus kind of shifted. Less about Germany, more about applying that critical theory to American society.
And then the source highlights this crucial event in the mid-60s that really amplified these ideas in the U.S., the student rebellion.
Yeah, the protests against the Vietnam War, the draft, big upheaval on campuses. And these students, the source points out, they were looking for an intellectual framework, some kind of theory of some sort, to make sense of it all, to justify their opposition.
Enter Herbert Marcuse.
Exactly. Marcuse is pivotal here. He'd stayed in the U.S. when the rest of the Frankfurt School went back to Germany after the war. And his books, like Eros and Civilization from 1955, which kind of mixed Marx and Freud and One-Dimensional Man from 1964, they really clicked with the student movement. They offered critiques of capitalist society that resonated, as the source puts it, with what students were feeling. He gave them that theory they were looking for.
And because he was willing to actually go and speak at protests, he became this huge figure, known as the father of the New Left in the U.S., really influential.
Hugely. And in 1965, he wrote this essay, Repressive Tolerance. which is pretty central to the source's argument. He argued that capitalist democracies actually have totalitarian aspects. He said genuine tolerance shouldn't tolerate repression, meaning it shouldn't tolerate views that uphold the status quo if that status quo is seen as oppressive. So he proposed what he called liberating tolerance, which meant quite explicitly intolerance against movements from the right and toleration of movements from the left.
Intolerance against the right, tolerance for the left. That's pretty direct. So what did that actually mean? What kind of intolerance was he talking about? What speech should be shut down?
Well, Marcuse specified. He advocated for the withdrawal of toleration of speech and assembly from groups and movements which promote aggressive policies, armament, chauvinism, discrimination on the grounds of race and religion, or which oppose extension of public services, Social Security, Medicare, etc. The source notes that this list might sound eerily familiar today. He even suggested that achieving liberation might require apparently undemocratic means if the usual paths were blocked by, quote, organized oppression and indoctrination.
So basically, silencing certain conservative views was potentially necessary for progress.
That's the argument Marcuse was making, according to the source. He was essentially preaching intolerance towards conservative positions on race, religion, patriotism, government spending. And he was preaching it to this huge receptive student audience in the 60s, a very direct application of that critical theory idea.
Okay, so Marquise influences these students. What happens next? How does this connect to today?
Well, the source argues that many of those students stayed in academia. They became professors. And within universities, the ideology supposedly evolved, with each generation pushing things just a little more extreme each time. The source gives an example, how Marquise's idea that discrimination on the grounds of race should not be tolerated allegedly morphed into something like criticism of race should not be tolerated, and that criticism was then silenced using those undemocratic means Marcuse had talked about.
And this academic evolution, this is where the source draws the line to the, quote, modern Tumblr-esque social justice warrior.
Yeah, it makes that connection. It suggests an initial link through the hippie movement, which it says was heavily influenced by Marcuse. That movement emphasized personal liberation and love above all, leading to the idea that everyone was an individual deserving of love, which, the source actually adds, is a sentiment it doesn't disagree with in itself. But then, the source argues there was a negative turn. This idea of individuality above all supposedly twisted into everyone is special. It describes the special snowflake idea. The child told constantly how special they are, gets participation trophies, praised even for wrong answers, leading, the source claims, to narcissistic tendencies.
Right. And the consequence, according to this narrative...
The consequence comes when that child grows up. They eventually have to face the fact that he's not really that special. But instead of accepting that, the source suggests they might draw on those Marcuse-inspired ideas, learned perhaps from sociology professors, and say, no, I am special, and if you don't see it, you're oppressing me. It paints a very specific psychological path.
Then add the internet into the mix.
Exactly. The information era. The source argues online anonymity means no social repercussions for posting insanity. You can do or be whatever you want online without facing the same social checks as in real life.
And it uses Tumblr as the prime example. This hypothetical kid, raised to think they're special, goes online, finds others just like him. But seeing so many others like him forces him to confront the idea that maybe he isn't unique after all. So the source asks, what does he do then?
The source's conclusion is pretty stark. The kid escalates, claims to be something even more unique, a wolf maybe, or sharing his head with angels and demons, something extreme to stand out. Others then supposedly mimic this, also longing to be special. The source claims the more rational people eventually leave these online spaces. What's left is described as a hug box, where people just reinforce each other's claims of specialness and feed into each other's delusions. And that's the source's explanation for the origin of the modern online SJW phenomenon, tying it all back through Marcuse, the Frankfurt School, Gramsci, Lukács, and even that initial failure of Marx's prediction. It's quite a narrative.
Wow. Okay, so after tracing this whole lineage from 1914 Marxist theory all the way to modern internet culture, the source asks the big question. Is there a Marxist conspiracy to overthrow Western society? What's its answer?
Interestingly, the source says it personally doubts it. The reasoning given is that the horse bucked him long ago, meaning the original Marxist project went off in too many different directions. It's not some centrally planned conspiracy in its view. It does mention another theory. Maybe it's part of a bigger conspiracy for globalization benefiting transnational corporations. Again, the source doubts it's a conscious conspiracy, but it does suggest corporations are happy to take advantage of it for their own gain. So not orchestrating it, but using it.
But conspiracy or not, the source lands on a very strong final judgment.
Extremely strong. It concludes, and this is a direct quote summarizing its stance, conspiracy or not, cultural Marxism is malignant. It is destroying the values upon which the United States and the nations of Europe were built. It needs to be stopped. That's the ultimate takeaway presented by this particular source material we've been exploring. A very direct, very critical assessment.
A powerful conclusion to the source's argument.
Definitely. And as we wrap up this deep dive, maybe something for you, the listener, to think about. Consider the changes you see around you, in societal values maybe, or just how people interact.
How might the history and the ideas we've discussed today, the concepts of hegemony, critical theory, repressive tolerance, this idea of evolving ideologies, how might they offer a framework, just one possible lens, for understanding some of those shifts you're observing, something to mull over?